Dark clouds pressed low over Redwood Bend that night, turning the prairie into a swirling sea of darkness and rain. Abigail Hill was dozing in her rocking chair by the fire, still wearing her dusty riding boots, when she heard the knock, a fierce, desperate pounding that made her heart skip a beat. Cautiously, she lifted the latch and opened the door. There stood Silas Morgan, the man who'd left town under a cloak of mystery years before. Rain drenched his broad-rimmed hat and trickled down his weary face. In his arms he clutched a tiny blanket-wrapped baby. "He ain't yours," Silas rasped. "But he needs you." Redwood Bend, nestled on the cusp of rolling plains and towering pine forests, wasn't the largest settlement in the territory, but it was one of those towns where everyone knew everyone, or thought they did. Timber was a strong industry here, but the real draw had always been the railroad that cut a path westward, carrying fortune seekers, dreamers, and desperados alike. The year was 1882, and Redwood Bend's dusty main street boasted a saloon, a general store, a feed shop, a small jailhouse, and a smattering of homes built from newly milled timber. Abigail Hill arrived in Redwood Bend 3 years ago, escaping a life of disappointment in Kansas City. She'd been raised back east in a home that never understood her restless spirit. She was a tall, slender woman in her mid-20s, with hair the color of mahogany and eyes that held a quiet determination. Despite her gentle demeanor, Abigail earned her keep as a seamstress and clerk at the general store. She'd quickly won the respect of the townsfolk for her dependable, if somewhat solitary nature. People had once whispered about Abigail's brief engagement to a traveling ranch hand, a man with broad shoulders and a quick smile, named Thomas Reeves. That relationship ended abruptly when he ran off without a word. After that heartbreak, Abigail swore off men and their secrets, channeling her energy into her work and the small garden behind her modest cabin. She rarely entertained visitors, preferring the solace of her sewing and the hush of lonely nights under the wide frontier sky. But Redwood Bend was not a place free of gossip. There were rumors about the quiet widow Mrs. Marjorie Beckett, who spent her days singing hymns in the church even after the final service had ended. There were tales about Jeremiah Boone, the blacksmith, who was said to have helped a gang of train robbers hide out one night. And there were murmurs about Silas Morgan, once a local ranch foreman for the Farnsworth family. He'd disappeared after a violent altercation with the Farnsworth patriarch, leaving behind unsettled debts and even darker speculations. When Abigail first met Silas Morgan, a year after she settled in Redwood Bend, he seemed a ghost from the outskirts of memory, drifting into town only to restock supplies. Their paths crossed one dusk at the general store. He wore a battered hat, his face etched with worry. She saw something in those eyes, a burden heavier than any he could carry on horseback. Then, as quietly as he had appeared, he vanished again. Now, on this storm-lashed night, Silas re-emerged with a baby in his arms and a plea in his voice. In Redwood Bend, legends were born from a single moment, like a gunshot echoing across the valley. Within hours, tongues would wag about the sudden reappearance of Silas Morgan, of the crying infant wrapped in a faded quilt, and of Abigail's stunned, shivering silhouette in the open doorway. Abigail stared at Silas' rainwater, dripping from the brim of his hat. The lamplight from inside her cabin flickered across his tense features. Her heart thrummed with apprehension. She had so many questions. Where had he been all this time? Why did he have a baby? And why bring the child to her? But she was a woman of compassion, first and foremost. Ignoring her trembling hands, she nodded and stepped back. "Come inside," she said, her voice betraying both curiosity and concern. Silas stepped over the threshold, holding the baby awkwardly, as though he feared he might drop him at any moment. The rain-slicked floor glistened as Abigail hurried to close the door. It was only after she'd secured the latch that she turned to properly face him, crossing her arms over her chest. The baby's cry tore at her heart. In one swift motion, she reached for the infant, cradling him in her arms, her practiced motherly instincts surprising even herself. She had no children of her own, never married, but she'd grown up helping her sister care for young nieces and nephews back east. She rocked the baby gently, humming a lullaby she hadn't recalled in years. Silas looked relieved to see the baby in gentler hands. He removed his hat and ran his fingers through his damp hair. A fresh streak of lightning cut across the sky, illuminating the small cabin through the windows. "His name is Jonah." "Silas," said, voice low. He's about 6 months old. He ain't yours, I know, but—" He paused, swallowing hard. "He needs you." Abigail's heartbeat thundered in her ears. Jonah, a sweet name for a sweet boy. The baby's eyes were wide and dark, reflecting the lamplight, as though searching for comfort. "Whose child is he?" Abigail asked softly, her breath catching in her throat. "Who is his mother?" Silas hesitated, glancing around the cabin as if searching for the right words. "His mother's gone, Abigail," he said, his gaze skittering away from hers. She passed on not long after he was born." A pang of sorrow lanced through her. "What about his father?" Silas set his hat on the table, shoulders sagging. "That's complicated," he muttered. Then, almost as if by compulsion, he added, "I'm not his pa, if that's what you're thinking. But there's no one else, Abigail. I've been riding with him for weeks, trying to find a safe place. I can't stay. Not with the trouble that's following me." A storm of questions brewed inside Abigail. But the baby in her arms was real immediate. She could feel Jonah's tiny body shudder, his crying fit replaced by a weary whimper. Steadying her emotions, she nodded. "I don't understand," she admitted, "but I'll do what I can." Before Silas could respond, thunder rattled the windows. Abigail gestured toward the small wooden crib in the corner, a relic of Redwood Bend's neighborly kindness left behind when Mrs. Emerson's baby outgrew it, and kindly donated to Abigail, just in case you ever need it, dear. She laid Jonah down carefully, tucking the blanket around him. She turned to find Silas watching her with a mix of gratitude and desperation. "Thank you," he said, voice quivering with relief. "But I need to tell you something else. There's a reason I had to bring him here to you. It's about the Farnsworth family, and what happened the night I left town." Silas looked around the cabin, his eyes flickering over the humble furniture, the flickering lantern on the table, and the steady rise and fall of baby Jonah's chest. Outside, wind howled across the open prairie, and rain lashed the windows. It seemed the very night was conjuring all the old spirits he'd tried to outrun. He began haltingly, as if pieces of his story weighed heavier than he could manage. "I used to be the ranch foreman for the Farnsworth family. Old man Farnsworth Everett. Farnsworth had taken me on after I saved his grandson from a stampede. He trusted me, treated me like kin. But his eldest son, Alan Farnsworth, and I never saw eye to eye. Abigail listened, hands clasped tightly together in her lap. She could feel the tension in Silas's voice, see the haunting regret in his eyes. She'd heard rumors about the Farnsworth estate, an empire built on sprawling cattle fields, shady deals, and iron-fisted control of Redwood Bend's economy. Rumors claimed that Alan Farnsworth in particular was ruthless, though nothing had ever been proven. The trouble started when I stumbled upon something I shouldn't have. Silas continued. Alan was involved in a land swindle, forging deeds and pushing small ranchers off their land. I witnessed a confrontation between him and a rancher named Philip McNamara. It ended with shots fired in the barn. Alan killed him, Abigail. Killed him in cold blood. She swallowed hard. Murder in Redwood Bend had always been the hushed secret no one wanted to speak aloud. "Why didn't you go to Sheriff Green?" she asked. Silas sighed. "I tried. But the Farnsworths practically own Redwood Bend. The sheriff ain't a bad man, but he's turned a blind eye in the past. After all, Farnsworth money funds, the town's expansions pays for church renovations, lines, pockets here and there. If I'd come forward, I would have been found swinging from a tree in no time." Abigail's eyes darted to Jonah, still asleep in the crib. "So that's why you left. But what does this have to do with Jonah?" Silas's gaze flickered to the child. "I'm getting there," he said quietly. "After that murder, I planned to leave Redwood Bend for good. But there was a young woman, Emily Carter. She worked in the Farnsworth's main house as a maid. Alan had taken a fancy to her, though she wanted no part of him. One night, she came to me in tears, begging for help. Alan had forced himself on her. She was terrified of him, of what might happen to her if she spoke out. Abigail felt her stomach twist. She pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes stinging with empathy for the girl she barely knew, but felt she understood all too well. "Emily Carter," she murmured. She remembered the name from hushed circles at the general store, a kind-hearted but shy girl who avoided attention. "She got pregnant," Silas continued in a trembling voice. "Alan disowned her, threatened her, said no one would believe her story. She was fired without severance, turned out onto the street. That's when she came looking for me. We fled Redwood Bend together, hoping to find somewhere safe for her to have the baby." Abigail's pulse pounded. "Then Jonah. Jonah Farnsworth by blood," Silas said with a bitter edge. "Alan Farnsworth's son." But Emily never wanted him to know. She passed away from fever a couple of months after birth. God rest her soul. Silas paused, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I've been looking for a decent place ever since. But Farnsworth's men have been on my tail, likely looking to dispose of any threats." Abigail's mind spun. She could see the Farnsworth estate looming in her memories. The big house with its white columns, always overshadowing Redwood Bend like a watchful vulture. "Why me?" she asked, her tone almost plaintive. "Why did you bring the boy to me?" Silas met her gaze, his voice trembling with sincerity. "Because you have a good heart, Abigail. You're one of the few people I trust. And if something happens to me, Jonah needs someone who won't turn him away or hand him over to Farnsworth out of fear." She ran a hand through her hair, exhaling slowly. Jonah stirred softly in the crib, but stayed asleep. "Silas," she said, leaning forward, "this is bigger than just you or me. If the Farnsworths find out about Jonah, they will find out." Silas interrupted grimly. which is why I need to leave him with you tonight. I have to draw Farnsworth's attention away. Keep on the move, so they don't come sniffing around. And maybe, just maybe, you can keep Jonah safe here until I can figure something else out." Abigail fell silent. She wanted to protest, to say she wasn't fit to care for a baby who belonged to the most powerful family in Redwood Bend, but the helpless child was sleeping in her crib, motherless, with a father who threatened violence. And she'd made a promise to herself long ago never to turn away someone in need. She closed her eyes for a moment, then looked at Silas. "All right," she said softly. "I'll keep him safe. But you have to promise you'll come back when you can. Jonah deserves to know there's someone out there fighting for him." Silas nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "I'll be back as soon as I can. God willing." Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, a new bond was forged, a desperate alliance to protect an innocent life from the shadows of Redwood Bend's most fearsome family. Abigail woke to the soft whimper of Jonah. For a moment, she thought she'd dreamed the entire scene of Silas's arrival. But the baby's cries were real, and her heart thudded with a protective warmth she hadn't anticipated. As she changed him in the gentle morning light, she noticed again how vulnerable he looked, his tiny fingers curling around the edge of the blanket. She rocked him until he settled, then carried him over to the kitchen table. Thoughts swarmed in her mind. How would she keep him hidden from prying eyes? Redwood Bend was small. News of a baby would travel swiftly, especially if a Farnsworth spy was lurking around. Abigail lived on the edge of town, her cabin shielded by tall pine trees. That helped. She decided she would only head into town for necessary supplies, and even then she'd conceal Jonah from view. But she also knew she couldn't hide a baby forever. The Farnsworth name carried weight, and if Alan Farnsworth even sniffed that his child was still alive, her blood went cold, thinking about what that ruthless man would do to cover his tracks. She placed Jonah in the crib and made a quick breakfast of cornbread and coffee. While Jonah slept again, she quickly penned a letter to her childhood friend, Rebecca Summers, who lived in Cheyenne. Rebecca was one of the few people Abigail trusted implicitly. Perhaps she could offer advice, or if things became dire, shelter. She sealed the letter with trembling hands, unsure if sending it was wise, but feeling she had no other choice. By midday, she'd mustered the courage to walk into town. She needed goat's milk for Jonah, spare diapers, a few groceries. She swaddled Jonah, tucking him against her chest in a sling she fashioned from a shawl. The morning's drizzle had ceased, leaving behind a dull, cloudy sky. Stepping onto the boardwalk of Main Street, Abigail noted several curious glances. A few townsfolk greeted her with polite nods or warm smiles. Mrs. Marjorie Beckett raised her parasol in hello. The blacksmith. Jeremiah Boone tipped his soot-stained cap. But their eyes lingered a moment too long on the quiet bundle at Abigail's chest. In the general store, she approached the proprietor, Mr. Clyde Morton, for a tin of goat's milk. He was an affable man, but also a known gossip. He squinted at the baby curiously. "Well now, Miss Hill, I didn't know you'd had a little one." "Been keeping secrets, have you?" Abigail forced a smile. "He's a distant relative's child," she lied, voice even. "I'm just watching him for a while." Morton nodded, but she could see the wheels turning behind his eyes, storing her words away for future chatter. "Ah, I see. Must be tough all on your own." She just shrugged, hoping to end the conversation. He's quiet enough for the most part. On her way out, she nearly collided with a tall, broad figure in the doorway. It was Sheriff Robert Greene, his ever-present star badge glinting on a dusty brown vest. He steadied her with a hand. "Pardon me, ma'am," he said politely, but then his gaze fell on the baby. Abigail's heartbeat thundered. She offered a small smile. "Morning, Sheriff." He gave a courteous tip of his hat. "Morning. Heard you had some excitement last night. Storm got everyone anxious. Saw Silas Morgan's horse tied up behind the feed store. You wouldn't happen to know if he's in town, would you?" Her throat went dry. She glanced at Jonah. He might have passed through," she managed, voice trembling only slightly. "He didn't stop by me, though." Sheriff Greene studied her face for a moment, his expression unreadable. "All right, Miss Hill. If you see him, let him know I'd like to speak with him." She nodded, heart pounding, and slipped away as gracefully as she could. Outside, she pressed Jonah close. Did Silas linger in town longer than he said? Or had Farnsworth's men spotted his horse and fed that information to the sheriff? She didn't know. But either way, Redwood Bend was already humming with suspicion. On the third day, a timid knock rattled her door around midday. Startled, she tucked Jonah into the makeshift cradle and hurried to open it. Outside stood Marjorie Beckett, the widow who spent her time praying in the church. Her face was drawn with concern, her gloved hands trembling. Marjorie Abigail said, forcing a polite smile, "Is everything all right?" Marjorie nodded, though the lines around her eyes betrayed anxiety. "I'm fine," she said in her soft voice, "but I needed to speak with you." She glanced over her shoulder before slipping inside. She took note of the baby, and her eyes widened with surprise and something like relief. Abigail closed the door gently, her own nerves on edge. "Please come sit," she offered, guiding the older woman to a chair by the hearth. "Would you like some coffee?" Marjorie shook her head. She folded and unfolded her hands in her lap, as if struggling to find the right words. "Abigail, dear, I'm not one to pry." She began, her tone gentle. "But I must confess I heard rumors in town about Silas Morgan showing up at your door and you having a baby in your care." Abigail's heart lurched. She kept her face composed, searching for the proper response. I'm helping a friend. The baby needed looking after," she said carefully. Marjorie's gaze flicked to Jonah, asleep in the cradle. She leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm not here to scold you or spread cult gossip. I came to warn you. Alan Farnsworth has been asking around about a baby. He's been putting pressure on certain folks like Clyde Morton at the store, even little school teacher Harriet Young, to see if they know anything. And rumor has it he brought in a hired gun, a man named Ford Dickens, to track down Silas." A chill ran through Abigail. The Farnsworth reach was vast indeed. I see she managed her throat tight. Marjorie continued, "I know what it is to be alone, to have secrets that weigh heavily. My husband was once indebted to Everett Farnsworth. It cost him his life. I won't see another good soul crushed by that family." Tears pricked Abigail's eyes. She reached over and covered Marjorie's hands with her own. "Thank you for your kindness," she whispered. I don't want trouble, but the baby is innocent in all this." Marjorie nodded, understanding, shining in her eyes. "If you need anything, you come to me. I'm not afraid of Farnsworth anymore. I've lost too much already." She hesitated, then pressed a small, folded piece of paper into Abigail's hand. This is the address of my cousin James Carter in St. Louis. He's a lawyer, a good man. If Farnsworth tries to pull any legal tricks, James might help." Abigail clutched the paper, a flicker of hope igniting in her. "Bless you, Marjorie," she said. I hope I don't have to use this, but it's reassuring to know." With that, Marjorie made a hasty exit, leaving Abigail feeling both comforted and more anxious than ever. She had an ally, but the noose was tightening. Later that afternoon, while Jonah napped, Abigail read the note's address carefully. James Carter, 145. Willow Street, St. Louis. It read in neatly penned script. She tucked it away in a wooden box with her most precious belongings. She thought of sending James Carter a letter detailing the situation, but decided it might be too risky for now. Before dusk, she ventured to the small barn behind her cabin to chop some firewood. The rhythmic thwack of the axe against the log almost lulled her into calm. She didn't hear the approach of footsteps until it was too late. "Easy now," a low voice drawled. She spun around, heart pounding, to see a man leaning against the barn wall. He was tall, dressed in dusty black clothes, a pistol strapped to his hip. His face was long and scarred, his eyes cold. "I'm not here to harm you, unless you make me." Abigail gripped the axe handle. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice quavering slightly. The stranger tipped his wide-brimmed hat. "Name's Ford Dickens," he said, a slight sneer playing on his lips. "I reckon you've heard of me." Her pulse throbbed. This was the hired gun Farnsworth had supposedly brought in. He was known for his ruthlessness, if rumor held any truth. "I'm just a poor widow, mister," she lied as steadily as she could. "I don't have anything worth stealing." Dickens chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Don't need your money, ma'am. I'm just curious if you've seen Silas Morgan around these parts." She lifted her chin, mustering bravery. "Haven't seen him in some time." He studied her eyes, narrowed. "Word has it he showed up at your door during the storm carrying a baby." Abigail's grip on the axe tightened. "Word travels fast and wrong in Redwood Bend," she said, trying to sound dismissive. Dickens took a step closer. "I think you're lying, Miss Hill. If I find out you're hiding that kid or Morgan, I'll be back. And trust me, Farnsworth don't like folks keeping secrets." For a moment, they locked gazes, tension thick as fog. Finally, Dickens pulled back. "Have a nice evening," he drawled. Then he turned and left without another word. Abigail remained rooted in place, listening to the hammer of her heartbeat. This was a warning, a promise that Farnsworth would stop at nothing. She set aside the axe and hurried to the cabin, breath trembling. She found Jonah cooing softly in his cradle, all innocence and warmth. Kneeling beside him, she whispered, "I won't let them take you. I swear it." The next few days were a study in nerves. Abigail remained mostly indoors, with Jonah venturing into town only when absolutely necessary. She noticed strangers drifting through Redwood Bend, men who looked out of place among the usual ranchers and laborers. Some lingered by the saloon. Others loitered near the livery stable, all wearing that alert, predatory look that suggested Farnsworth had placed a bounty on Silas Morgan's head. One evening, Abigail was rocking Jonah to sleep when she heard a soft rap on the window. Her heart jumped. She carefully placed Jonah in his cradle, retrieved the shotgun she kept by the hearth, loaded but never fired, and moved cautiously toward the window. She peered through the dim lamplight, ready to confront a lurking stranger. Instead, She saw a familiar figure crouched under the sill. Silas Morgan, eyes wide with desperation. Abigail unlatched the window. "Silas," she hissed, "where have you been?" Without waiting for an invitation, Silas hoisted himself through the window and into the cabin. He was filthy mud-caked and shivering. His eyes darted around until they rested on Jonah, safe and sound in the cradle. He exhaled deeply, relief etched on his face. "I couldn't use the door," he panted, shrugging off a drenched coat. "Might be watched. Farnsworth's got his men everywhere." Abigail set the shotgun aside and helped steady him. "We need to talk," she said, concern mingling with frustration. "Ford Dickens came by the other day, practically threatened me. We're in deep trouble, Silas." Silas nodded grimly, eyes haunted. "I know. I've been out in the hills trying to lay low. They're searching every ranch, every shack for me. Farnsworth must have spread the word that I'm dangerous. Might even have put a price on my head." "So what's your plan?" Abigail demanded, her voice low yet urgent. "You said you'd come back, but you can't just keep flitting in and out. Jonah needs stability. He needs a future without fear." Silas's jaw tightened. "I'm gonna handle this," he said. "But I need proof that Farnsworth killed that rancher. Proof that Jonah is Alan Farnsworth's son. If I can gather enough evidence, maybe Farnsworth's hold on Redwood Bend will break. Then Jonah could live here safely." Abigail's eyes flickered with doubt. "Do you really think justice will prevail? Farnsworth has money influence men like Dickens, who kill for pay." Silas swallowed hard, removing a folded paper from his coat. "I have some Leeds letters Emily wrote to me, detailing her abuse at the Farnsworth estate, Alan's threats. They might help, especially if we can find a lawyer or a judge who isn't in Farnsworth's pocket." At the mention of a lawyer, Abigail's mind jumped to the note Marjorie Beckett gave her James Carter's address in St. Louis. "I know someone," she said quickly. "Marjorie Beckett gave me the contact of her cousin James Carter. He's a lawyer. If we can get these letters to him, he might help." Silas's eyes lit with hope. "That's perfect. But sending a letter won't be enough. We need to get Jonah out of Redwood Bend at least for a while. And we need to deliver these documents in person, or Farnsworth will intercept them." Abigail's heart pounded. The idea of leaving Redwood Bend had always lingered in the back of her mind, but her life was here, or what little of a life she had. Still, the baby's safety was paramount. "You want me to leave town with Jonah?" Silas placed a hand on her arm. "I wouldn't ask if there was another way. I'll create a distraction, lead Farnsworth's men away. Then you take Jonah on the stagecoach or by horseback to Cheyenne or all the way to St. Louis if you can. Once you find James Carter, tell him everything. Show him Emily's letters." A wave of realization crashed over her. "You are planning something dangerous," she whispered. Silas hung his head, a heavy sadness in his eyes. "If Farnsworth wants a fight, I'll give him one. But I need your word you'll keep Jonah safe." Abigail looked over at Jonah asleep. Innocence personified. Her throat tightened. She remembered Silas's first words that stormy night. "He ain't yours, but he needs you." She walked over to the cradle and gently ran her fingers through Jonah's soft hair. Then she looked back at Silas. "He needs both of us," she said quietly. "I'll do as you ask. But you'd better survive this, Silas. For Jonah's sake." He nodded, his face set. "I'll try." Outside, the moon cast pale shadows across the clearing, Tomorrow, they would begin preparing. Abigail would gather supplies for a long journey, forging a plan to slip out of Redwood Bend without alerting Farnsworth's men. Silas would spread false trails, speak to a few trusted friends, and find a way to unearth the truth that could topple the Farnsworth empire. For the first time since the night he arrived, Silas lingered, stealing glances at Jonah with a mixture of regret and love. He might not be the boy's father, but his protectiveness spoke volumes. Before dawn, he slipped back out the window, whispering one last pledge. "I'll be back soon. Stay safe." Preparations for escape took all of Abigail's courage and cunning. She quietly sold a few possessions, a spare trunk, a rocking chair, to gather enough money for a coach ticket. Under the pretense of ordering new sewing supplies, she also purchased traveling clothes and a sturdy pair of boots that could withstand a long journey. She confided in just one other person, Marjorie Beckett. The widow, upon hearing the plan, pressed a small purse of coins into Abigail's hand. "My husband's life insurance policy," she said, voice trembling. "It ain't much, but it'll help. Go save that child." Abigail's eyes brimmed with gratitude. "I will. Thank you, Marjorie." While she made her quiet arrangements, Silas worked in the shadows. By day, he was nowhere to be seen. But at night, he'd appear at Abigail's barn or slip through the window with updates. Farnsworth's men were growing restless. Ford Dickens, in particular, prowled around town like a wolf sniffing out a fresh scent. One evening, Silas confided a new worry. "I overheard Farnsworth's men talking. They suspect you might know something. Dickens is planning to search every home on the outskirts of town. If he comes here..." Silas trailed off, the unspoken danger hanging in the air. Abigail shivered at the thought of Dickens barging into her cabin, finding Jonah and turning them over to the Farnsworth family. She tightened her jaw. "We need to leave soon," she said. "The next coach leaves tomorrow at noon, headed for Cheyenne." Silas nodded. "Tomorrow at noon, I'll lead Farnsworth's men away from Redwood Bend. I've arranged for a rancher friend, Oliver Brandt, to claim he spotted me heading north. That should keep Dickens off your trail." Abigail closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "I'll have my bags packed. Jonah and I will slip onto the stagecoach. After that, we'll make our way east and find James Carter in St. Louis." The night passed with painstaking slowness. Abigail scarcely slept, listening for any sounds of approaching riders. But dawn arrived uneventfully. She dressed Jonah in a warm outfit, bundling him against the chill. Then she packed Emily's letters Silas had given them to her the night before into a satchel along with a few supplies. She gulped down a cup of coffee, her nerves too frazzled to eat more than a bite of bread. Then, with Jonah in her arms, she stepped onto the porch. A hush blanketed the morning. Even the wind seemed subdued, as though Redwood Bend itself was waiting. She took a side route into town, avoiding the main road. Glancing back at her little cabin, she felt a pang of sorrow. Would she ever see this place again? It had become her sanctuary, a humble haven. But Jonah's future outweighed her sentimental ties. At the station, a dusty stagecoach waited horses, stamping impatiently. A small crowd milled about 2 travelers heading to Cheyenne. A mail clerk loading parcels and Mr. Clyde Morton on some errand. Abigail lingered in the shade, face half hidden by a bonnet, heart thumping. Minutes before departure, a sudden commotion erupted at the far end of town. Shouts and hoofbeats echoed across the street. She risked a glance and saw a group of riders galloping away, dust swirling in their wake. Among them she recognized Silas's distinct silhouette. Farnsworth's men had taken the bait. Seizing the moment, Abigail handed her ticket to the driver. He barely glanced at her, preoccupied with the flurry of activity. She climbed into the coach, settling Jonah on her lap. The door shut with a resounding thud, and the driver cracked his whip. They lurched forward, leaving Redwood Bend's wooden storefronts behind. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. She felt relief and fear in equal measure. Had they truly evaded Dickens and the Farnsworth goons? About half an hour down the road, she allowed herself a small smile. Jonah cooed quietly, seemingly soothed by the rocking motion. Maybe, just maybe, they'd done it. Maybe Silas's ruse would hold, and she could deliver Emily's letters to James Carter. But fate had a cruel sense of timing. As the stagecoach rounded a bend, it abruptly came to a halt, horses whinnying in distress. The driver's voice rang out. "Ho there!" What in tarnation? Abigail's stomach plunged. The door was yanked open, revealing a familiar, scarred face. Ford Dickens. He leveled a revolver at the passengers. "Everyone stay put!" he growled, black eyes scanning the compartment. Abigail's blood turned to ice. She held Jonah close, trying to shield him from Dickens' gaze. Behind the hired gun, 2 more armed men waited, blocking the road. One glance told Abigail they wore Farnsworth's brand on their tack. This was an ambush. Dickens' sneer widened as his eyes fell on Abigail and the baby. "Well, well," he drawled. "Look who's going for a little ride." Fear coiled inside her like a snake. She trembled, whispering, "Please, let us go." Dickens chuckled, motioning for her to step out. "Oh, I don't think so, Miss Hill. That baby belongs to Mr. Farnsworth, and you just tried to steal him away." Abigail's heart hammered. She knew Farnsworth's men wouldn't hesitate to harm her if it meant silencing the truth. Clutching Jonah, she ducked her head, praying for a miracle. But she could see the grim resolve in Dickens's eyes. This was a man who lived and breathed violence. "Come on," Dickens barked. "Hand over the kid, and no one else gets hurt." One passenger tried to intervene, an older man, who said, "There's no need to harm the lady." But Dickens shoved his gun barrel under the man's chin, silencing him. Abigail felt tears burn her eyes as she stepped onto the dusty road, Jonah squirming anxiously in her arms. The other passengers watched fear etched on their faces as Dickens' men took her by the arm. There would be no easy escape. Dust choked the air as Dickens and his henchmen dragged Abigail and Jonah away from the stagecoach. The driver and other passengers could do nothing but watch in stunned horror. Abigail's arms tightened protectively around the baby, her heart pounding. They forced her onto a waiting horse, practically ripping Jonah from her grip before handing him back once she was perched in the saddle. Dickens mounted behind her, one arm circling her waist, the other gripping the reins. "Try to run and I'll shoot you in the back," he snarled. Abigail's tears were silent, her terror a black pit in her stomach. She could barely breathe for the dust swirling around them as the small party galloped toward the Farnsworth estate. She tried to gather her scattered thoughts. Could she reason with Alan Farnsworth? Would he be brazen enough to murder her outright, or would he try to conceal his crimes with more subtlety? Before long, the sprawling Farnsworth ranch came into view, a white 2-story house with wide porches surrounded by acres of fenced pasture. Ranch hands halted their work to stare at the newcomers. Some recognized Dickens as captives, and whispers spread like wildfire. Abigail heard the distant bellow of a foreman, perhaps Farnsworth himself commanding everyone back to work. Dickens practically yanked her off the horse in front of the main house. She stumbled, nearly dropping Jonah, but somehow managed to steady him. Her eyes flicked around, searching for an escape route. But the yard was swarming with ranch hands loyal to Farnsworth, many armed with rifles or pistols. Then from the porch, Alan Farnsworth emerged. He was a tall man in his mid-30s, dressed in tailored Western attire, hair slicked back. His face was handsome, but marred by a permanent sneer of entitlement. Abigail's blood ran cold at the sight of him. "Well, well," Farnsworth drawled, descending the steps. His gaze landed on Jonah, then on Abigail. A flicker of recognition crossed his eyes. He'd seen her around Redwood Bend, but never paid much attention, it seemed. "Who do we have here?" Dickens tipped his hat in a mock gesture of respect. "Caught her trying to flee with the boy on the stagecoach." Alan Farnsworth stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Is that so?" He stepped closer, peering down at Jonah. The baby's face scrunched in confusion on the verge of tears. My! Emily Carter's brat is still alive." Abigail pressed Jonah protectively against her chest. "He's innocent," she choked out. You're his father, aren't you?" Farnsworth's expression turned dark. "That's quite a claim," he sneered. "But even if I am, that doesn't excuse your abduction. Miss—" He snapped his fingers at Dickens. "What's her name?" "Abigail Hill," Dickens supplied. "Seamstress from Redwood Bend." "Miss Hill." Farnsworth circled her like a predator. "You've got some nerve meddling in things you don't understand. Where's Silas Morgan?" Abigail's chest constricted at the mention of Silas's name. She glared at Farnsworth, summoning courage from some hidden reservoir. "I don't know," she lied. "And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you." A slow, dangerous grin spread across Farnsworth's face. "We'll see." He snapped his fingers again, and two ranch hands stepped forward, gripping Abigail by the arms. Jonah began to fuss, wailing in protest. Alan Farnsworth leaned in close. "Do you have any idea what you've gotten yourself into?" he whispered, voice dripping with menace. "Emily Carter was a fool to think she could escape me. If that sniveling Silas Morgan hadn't interfered, I'd have taken care of matters months ago." Abigail's eyes flashed with defiance. "You mean you would have killed your own child?" She spat, her voice shaking but resolute. Farnsworth's lip curled. "Shut your mouth," he hissed. "I do what I must to protect my family's name. That whelp is a disgrace born from a servant who didn't know her place." Disgust roiled in Abigail's stomach. She felt tears burning her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "You're a monster," she said, her voice cracking. Farnsworth chuckled, stepping back. "Monsters, angels, it's all the same in this world. Whoever's got the power wins." He glanced at Dickens. "Take her inside. We'll lock her up until Morgan comes sniveling around. Then we'll deal with them both." Abigail's pulse thundered as the ranch hands began to drag her towards the house. She struggled, crying out, "Don't hurt the baby." "Please just," Jonah wailed louder, sensing the tension. Farnsworth only laughed, motioning for one of his men to take the child away. "Keep that brat quiet," he said, "and no harm is to come to him yet. He's leverage." As Jonah was torn from her arms, Abigail let out a raw, anguished scream. She fought with every ounce of her strength, but the men subdued her easily. In the chaos, she caught a glimpse of Farnsworth's satisfied smirk. "You'll regret this," she gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You'll regret every bit of it." Somehow Farnsworth replied smugly, "I doubt that." Then the heavy doors of the Farnsworth mansion slammed shut behind her, leaving her trapped in the lair of Redwood Bend's most powerful devil. Hours passed, or perhaps mere minutes, that stretched into an eternity before the lock on her door rattled. She tensed, expecting Dickens or Farnsworth. Instead, a ranch hand named Edward Bryson stepped inside. She recognized him. He'd been one of the quieter men around town. He closed the door behind him, eyes darting nervously. "Miss," he said in a hushed tone, "we don't have much time. I brought you some water." He handed her a canteen and a piece of bread. Abigail hesitated, warily accepting the items. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. Edward glanced over his shoulder. "I don't hold with Farnsworth's methods. I owe Silas Morgan my life. He saved me from a stampede once. Now Farnsworth's lost his mind. Talk as he's planning something vicious." She swallowed hard. Where's Jonah Edwards' eyes flickered with sorrow. "He's in another room, guarded by 2 men. Farnsworth wants him alive, for now. But if Morgan doesn't show up, I fear Farnsworth might... Well, you can guess." Abigail's blood ran cold. "I have to get out of here," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "We need to save Jonah." Edward nodded, looking resolute. "I'll do what I can. I can't free you outright. Dickens is on guard. But there's a storm rolling in tonight. If you can find a way downstairs, I'll have a horse waiting by the back gate." Her gaze flicked to the window, mind racing. "I'll try. But what about Jonah?" Edward frowned. "They're keeping him close. Farnsworth said he wants the boy as bait. Morgan has a way of hearing when trouble's near, so Farnsworth is certain he'll come. We just have to hope Silas knows what he's walking into." After Edward left, Abigail struggled to calm her racing thoughts. She ripped a strip of cloth from her petticoat, fashioned it into a makeshift rope. It wouldn't bear her entire weight, but perhaps it'd help her descend part of the way. Her mind whirled, formulating a plan: cause a distraction, locate Jonah, and reach the back gate where Edward would have a horse ready. Night fell and the promised storm arrived. Wind battered the walls, rain lashing the windows. Thunder growled in the distance. Abigail used the uproar of the weather to mask her efforts. She pried open the window, tied the strip of cloth to a bedpost, and eased herself down. She dropped the last few feet, landing hard on the muddy ground beneath the window, pain jolting up her ankles. She bit back a cry, heart hammering. Lightning illuminated the courtyard. She pressed against the side of the house, peering around. 2 men guarded the main entrance rifles, in hand, heads ducked against the rain. Abigail crept along the shadows, each flash of lightning a dangerous spotlight threatening to reveal her. She reached a side door leading into the house and tested it locked. Her pulse pounded. She had to find another way. Turning a corner, she spotted a stable door, partly ajar. Inside, horses stirred restlessly at the storm. Slipping in, she nearly gasped when she almost collided with Edward Bryson. "You made it," he whispered, relief in his eyes. "Jonah's upstairs in the nursery." Second door on the left. He pressed a small key into her hand. "This should unlock it. I'll distract the guard." Abigail clutched the key as if it were a lifeline. "I can't thank you enough," she breathed. Edward managed a tight smile. "Just get that boy out of here. I'll keep Farnsworth's men off your tail as long as I can." With that, he slipped into the hallway, heading upstairs. Abigail counted to 20, waiting for a noise, some sign. Then she heard shouting. "Hey, what are you doing here?" Followed by a crash. The guard had taken the bait. Heart in her throat, Abigail dashed inside. She found the nursery door with ease, her hands shaking as she fit the key into the lock. The door swung open to reveal Jonah in a wooden cradle. Tears streaming down his round cheeks. A single guard lay slumped on the floor, unconscious. Edward must have handled him quickly. She scooped Jonah into her arms, pressing her lips to his forehead. "It's okay, sweet boy, we're leaving," she whispered. Tears of relief mixing with the rain dripping from her hair. Suddenly, footsteps thundered behind her. She spun around to see Ford Dickens, his gun drawn. His face was contorted with fury. "Not another step," he growled. "Hand over the baby." Abigail's grip on Jonah tightened. She shook her head, defiant tears running down her face. "Never," she spat. Dickens cocked the revolver. Lightning flashed, illuminating his scarred face. But before he could pull the trigger, an explosion of noise startled them both. A window shattered behind Dickens, and in a flash of lightning Silas Morgan appeared. He tackled Dickens, sending them both crashing to the ground. "Run," Silas shouted, grappling with the gun. Abigail didn't hesitate. She clutched Jonah and bolted into the hallway. Echoes of the brawl followed her shouts, the thud of fists. She prayed Silas would come out on top. Racing down a flight of stairs, she nearly stumbled into a group of Farnsworth's men. But Edward Bryson was there, brandishing a rifle, firing a shot overhead. "Get back!" he yelled, forcing them to scatter. Abigail darted into the stormy night wind, whipping her hair, rain blinding her. She remembered Edward's promise about a horse at the back gate. She stumbled through the courtyard, half mad, with adrenaline and fear. Voices shouted behind her, bullets whizzing by in the dark. Her lungs burned, her arms aching from holding Jonah so tightly. At last, she spotted the back gate, a single lantern swaying in the wind, illuminating a saddled horse. With all her might, she hauled herself into the saddle. Jonah clutched desperately to her chest. She kicked the horse's flanks, urging it forward. The gate stood ajar, and they thundered into the open prairie storm clouds churning overhead. As she fled into the darkness, lightning revealed silhouettes on horseback giving chase. The Farnsworth men were in pursuit. Every clap of thunder felt like a gunshot in her ears. Jonah wailed at the onslaught of noise, but she pressed on, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know where Silas was, or if he'd survived. All she could do was ride hard, spurred by the desperate conviction that Jonah's life depended on her escape. The Farnsworth Empire lay behind her, seething with rage and violence. Out here on the endless prairie, she was alone with the storm and her promise. She'd sworn to keep Jonah safe. And if she had to outrun the devil himself, she would do it. Abigail rode through the storm well into the night, her body numb from cold and exhaustion. When at last the clouds broke just before dawn, she was miles from the Farnsworth ranch. She slowed the horse to a weary trot, glancing back over her shoulder. No sign of pursuers. Jonah squirmed, fussing weakly. She dismounted near a small creek, carefully kneeling in the damp grass. Her muscles burned, but she managed to cradle Jonah with one arm, while she cupped water in her free hand, offering him a drink. He gurgled in protest, but took a few sips, then settled against her chest. Looking at the faint light along the horizon, Abigail felt a surge of gratitude. They were alive. Somehow, against all odds, they'd escaped the Farnsworth grip, at least for now. She had no idea if Silas was safe. She could only pray he'd slipped away in the chaos. Rising on unsteady legs, she continued east. By mid-morning, she reached a small way station used by travelers and stage lines. It was little more than a shack and a corral, with fresh horses manned by a single attendant. Abigail approached cautiously, uncertain if Farnsworth's influence extended this far. An old man named Jacob greeted her with a toothless grin. "Morning, ma'am. You look like you've been through the ringer." "Need some supplies?" Abigail forced a polite smile. "Yes, please. And a change of horse if you can spare one. This one's about spent." Jacob studied the horse's lathered flanks and nodded. "Sure thing. Got one mare that's rested and ready." She traded what little money she had left for the fresh horse and some provisions, dried beef, a canteen of water, a bit of cloth she could fashion into diapers for Jonah. In a quiet moment, she changed Jonah's soiled clothes and tried to soothe his cries. Jacob eyed the baby sympathetically. "Poor little fella. You best be careful, ma'am. Heard there's been trouble in Redwood Bend, some big rancher looking for a woman, and a baby paying a handsome reward." Abigail's stomach clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "I'll be careful. Thank you for the warning." Back on the trail, she steeled her resolve. She had Emily's letters safely tucked in her satchel, evidence that could destroy Farnsworth if presented to the right people. She thought of St. Louis and James Carter, the lawyer who might help them find justice. But first, she needed to ensure they weren't being hunted. Days blurred into a fugitive journey. She kept off main roads, following little-traveled paths, and sleeping under the stars. At one point, she spotted riders in the distance, their silhouettes stark against the sky. She hid in a gully until they passed. Every step of the way, she felt Farnsworth's shadow looming, but she pressed on, driven by love and duty. After nearly a week of hard travel, Abigail reached Cheyenne. Exhausted and near penniless, she found refuge in a small boarding house owned by a kindly woman named Harriet Dawson. With Harriet's help, Abigail was able to earn a bit of money by mending clothes, while Jonah rested in a basket near her feet. Each time she rocked him, she thought of Silas, wondering if he still lived, or if Farnsworth had taken his revenge. While in Cheyenne, Abigail penned a letter to James Carter, explaining that she was coming with crucial documents. She used a false name for safety, signing the letter as a friend of Marjorie Beckett. She prayed it would reach him swiftly, and that he'd be ready to help when she finally arrived. One cold evening, as Abigail closed up her sewing kit, there was a commotion at the boarding house door. Harriet answered, and Abigail heard her exclaim in surprise. A moment later, Harriet appeared at Abigail's door with wide eyes. "There's a man here asking for you," she whispered. "Says his name is Silas Morgan." Abigail's heart practically stopped. She rushed out to the parlor and found Silas battered but alive, leaning on a walking stick. His face was bruised, one arm in a makeshift sling, but his eyes lit up with relief when he saw Jonah. Abigail let out a breathless laugh, tears brimming as Silas carefully took the baby in his good arm. "You made it," he said, voice thick with emotion. She reached out gingerly, touching his wounded shoulder. "You too," she murmured, heart brimming with gratitude. How did you escape?" Silas smiled wryly. "Dickens was tough, but I got the upper hand. I barely made it out of Farnsworth's house before half his men were on me. I rode for the hills and holed up with a friend of mine. Heard from Edward Bryson you headed east, so I followed. Took me a while." Tears streaked Abigail's cheeks as she wrapped her arms around them both. Jonah cooed as if sensing the reunion he'd been waiting for. In that moment, for the first time since the stormy night, Silas knocked on her door, Abigail felt truly safe. Yet the shadows of Farnsworth's tyranny still lingered. They had the proof they had an ally in St. Louis, but Redwood Bend remained under Farnsworth's grip. If they wanted justice for Emily, for Jonah, they'd have to fight, not just run. Silas brushed a tear from Abigail's cheek. "We'll keep going," he said quietly. "To St. Louis, to James Carter. Whatever it takes, Farnsworth's reign ends here." She nodded, drawing in a shaky breath. "No more running," she agreed. "For Jonah's sake." Outside, the wind rustled across the plains, carrying the faint scent of freedom and dawn. A new day was about to break, and with it came the promise that even the darkest secrets could be dragged into the light. As the sun rose on that wind-swept horizon, Abigail and Silas knew their fight was just beginning. Together they'd face down the powerful Farnsworth clan, protect young Jonah, and seek justice for Emily's memory. Their journey was a testament to the unbreakable bonds formed in the crucible of adversity, a promise that hope can flicker, even in the darkest corners of the Wild West. If this story of courage, sacrifice, and redemption has moved you, please consider supporting our channel. Your likes, shares, and subscriptions help keep these tales of frontier resilience alive. Spread the word and let others discover the drama twists and raw humanity that defined an era. And remember, even when the thunder rages and the night seems endless, the dawn always comes carrying with it the chance to write a new chapter of hope. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.